Nativity in Black by Brad Michael Elmore. Read by the author. Part 1. Galactus Shrugged. Epigraph. And I know how it should be. There is nothing more for you and I. Some are young and some are free, but I think I'm going blind. Kiss, going blind. Prologue. October 1979. High on Mount Baldy, they watched the sky, heads all glittery foam from the Krylon they'd lifted from shop class, a joint between them, arguing the finer points of the Led Zeppelin canon. Salad Brains conceding Houses of the Holy was somewhat wimpy, and Reed correct in his assessment of Plant's sped-up vocals, sounding a bit too much like Alvin and the Chipmunks. But the more laid-back, lemon-lime, sun-splashed psychedelic guitar wash was something Salad Brains could just dig on, you know? And Reed chastised him for being a dumb hippie, and reminded himself out loud that he needed a fresh copy of Zoso after seeds had busted up the gatefold spine on the one he currently had, and a streak of shattering light crossed the horizon in kaleidoscoping colors. But before they could decide if it was a meteor, or a satellite, or a UFO, it froze, hovering like a giant, pulsating 4th of July sparkler, before vanishing into the stars above. Chapter 1. June 1979. All in black, he came into the valley under cover of night, deep in the AM, slipping soundless through shadow over the streets of North Hollywood, hypnotized and bulging, heading west on Van Owen into Valley Glen, then south on Bel Air. He ducked down an alley, hewing close to the fence line where he spotted her gleaming dark green Cosworth Vega through the chain link parked in the tuck-under garage of the townhouse he'd tailed her to earlier that week. Jackpot. He vaulted the fence, no problem, and crouching low with furtive steps, made his way around the building's stucco wall perimeter until he found a high-set small sliding window he figured could only be for a bathroom or laundry. He reached up with gloved hands and popped the screen, careful to lay it face down flat on the ground, taking no chances with leaning it against the wall to catch the attention of a curious late-night passerby or the wandering spotlight of a police cruiser. He pressed a hand to the naked pane and gave it a push. Locked. He froze, watching for movement in the dark, making sure he was unobserved, listening over the distant seashell sounds of infrequent traffic, wafting off the 170 and the ambient hum of wall-mounted air conditioning. He looked up at the moon, a gauzy orange smudge behind the smog layer, noting it was full. He hadn't planned it that way and took it as an omen. Satisfied, he gave himself the go-ahead and wedged the flat end of a crowbar into the window jamb and applied pressure until it broke the lock, and again he waited, and again the coast was clear. He eased the window open, sucked in his stomach, held his breath and hoisted himself up and through, careful not to clamber about with the crowbar as he lowered inside and his hand met cold tiled floor, sweat beading off his nose and the ends of his hair, tapping out a rhythm on the ceramic louder than any other noise he was making. He got his feet under him and, staying crouched, waited for his eyes to adjust to the pitch dark, and when bathroom shapes came into soft blue focus, he moved to the door and set his ear against it, straining to hear anything over the sound of his heart throbbing in his ears, struggling to rein in his breathing, exhaling painfully slow with wide-open mouth as his body screamed for oxygen. Once certain it was safe to do so, he turned the knob and stepped out into the hall onto carpeted floor. He slipped off his shoes and clicked on his pen light and headed into the living room, and then the kitchen, gliding on the balls of his feet, darting the beam of light around, mapping the floor plan. Then he went back into the hall and briskly through a bedroom door and stood for a moment over the figure of a sleeping woman, studying her profile, her shoulder, neck, and cheek above the blanket smooth and pale as milk, ending in a head of dark hair against her pillow. He cast his light over her, and her eyelids fluttered and parted open, and she craned her head and faced directly into its beam. Blinded and confused, she muttered something, and before she could cry out, he dropped the light and crossed the room and fell upon her with the crowbar. Several grunting blows until she was lifeless, and the bed was gleaming oil black, and the air smelled of sweet metal. Hastily, he dropped the crowbar and throttled her by the neck, but she was already gone. He cursed at her and himself as he caught his breath. He was drenched in sweat and lightheaded. It had been abnormally hot, even for June, a record breaker in fact, and he sat at the edge of the bed gulping for air, head between his knees until the dizzy spell passed. He saw his pen light on the floor, beam half buried in carpet, like a tiny campfire or signal flare in a vast and craggy alien terrain. He picked it up and switched it off and went into the kitchen and helped himself to a Coke that was in the fridge, chugging it down and pitching the empty can into the sink. He went back into the bedroom and tried to position the body, but it was heavy and the limbs were slick, and the swollen head lolled with dead weight, and he was too pent up and excited to delay it any longer, so he masturbated over her bare feet, hissing things at her he wished she was alive to hear. When he climaxed, the euphoria crashed, and he got lightheaded again, and his stomach did a cold somersault, and he doubled over and puked into the carpet. A post-fugue clarity set in after all the dry heaving. He was disappointed in himself for not taking his time, not having the guts to bring the gun, not exerting more control over the situation. Too skittish, too froggy. Idiot. He wasted little time ransacking the place, stuffing anything of value he could find in a pillowcase he'd taken from the hallway closet. An experienced thief and burglar, he'd honed a keen sense of where people kept their valuables, precious heirlooms, and loose cash. He could read the indices inside a home and apply them to the cultural and socio-economic context to nose out the usual hiding places with uncanny accuracy. He tried using her blood to draw a large pentagram on the mirror, but by the time he got around to it, the blood was coagulating and hard to work with, so he used the lipstick he'd found in her purse to finish the job, then set about marking up the walls in arcane sigils of private esoterica. Then he signed his handiwork, Demon by Night, in big, bold letters over the bed, above the headboard, a name inspired by a Marvel comic he'd loved as a kid. He stood back and took a moment to admire it all, then said a quick prayer to Satan, slung the pillowcase over his shoulder, and strolled out the front door, calm and casual like he owned the place, hiking back to where he'd left the stolen Toyota in front of a body shop by the train tracks. He had a fractious, atavistic mind given to shamanic and horrible vision. In childhood, he was prone to petit mal seizures and epileptic fits due to a congenital birth defect, a consequence of his mother's prolonged exposure to noxious chemicals during her time spent laboring in a boot factory while he was still in her womb. He learned in early adolescence how to navigate the phantasms at the frayed edges of his senses with a heavy cocktail blend of drugs and alcohol. He thought of his crimes as a protest against a society that wronged him and a personal covenant with the devil, a high-form Satanism and great aeonic ritual working to carve his name on the belly of time and in the hopes of burning the world to the ground. But ultimately, it was merely a bombastic antisocial posture and elaborate theatrical self-deception to obscure the banal reality of his aberrant and incessant sexual compulsion. A complex thaumaturgy built to scaffold his delusions of grandeur and hide his sense of inadequacy and shame, papering over a want to see a woman truncated and reduced to surrender, and the charge it gave him to have the power to do so, with a defiant self-aggrandizement. He was on his third victim, and the newspapers had already branded him the Valley Ripper, but after tonight they'd start calling him by his chosen name. His real name was Nicholas Varala DeMarcus. It was his birthday. He was 20 years old. Chapter 2. Epigraph. When night darkens the street, then wander forth the sons of Belial, flown with insolence and wine. John Milton, Paradise Lost. He ditched the gray Celica in a Van Nuys residential area, a few blocks away from his van, a black 73 Chevy G10 Shorty that he inherited from his Uncle Pete, who customized the back into a camper that Nick had further converted into a mobile dugout of adolescent fantasy. Red bulbs in the ceiling swivel lights, blacklight posters, pin-ups, porno mags and comics buried under fast food and gas station trash, and overflowing black bags couched in between the mildewy heaps of dirty laundry. He got in, started her up, and headed for the mustard lights and buzzing neon glow of downtown, the beating heart of vice and criminal squalor in Los Angeles, where he fenced the goods in the smoky back room of a seedy pool hall by the bus terminal on the corner of 6th Street in South Los Angeles. The fence was a man he'd never used before, but his go-to guy had gotten himself pinched, so he'd had to ask around for a new one. A thick-lipped, frog-eyed and squat dude with shoulders like a bull and shrapnel scarring on his face, forming his mouth into a permanent sneer. He said his name was Raoul, and that he was Lebanese, though Nick thought he could pass as Chicano, and no doubt used this dubious ethnicity to his advantage. Nick watched as the fence inspected the gems, with a loop tucked in his eye, hunkered over a table in a Naugahyde booth, while his heavies busied themselves with a game of pool a few feet away. One a burly Samoan, the other a Peckerwood type. Nick fingered him as a probable cop. He had that kind of bearing about him. Undercover pigs always had something wrong with their getup. Some element out of place. A leak, too neat a haircut, or too new a jacket, too fit in the arms, too martial a watch. Or they overdid the skis in an incongruous way, the greasy hair and unkempt beard and trash mouth never quite matching the pallor of their skin, or the scrutinous clear eyes of sobriety. Nick was all too aware and cautious of the informant pipelines, rat holes, spooks, and undercovers that encompassed the snitch economy embedded within the underworld. 350, the fence said, setting down his loop and looking up at Nick, looming over his table like a scarecrow. For the ring, Nick said. All of it, the ring and whatever else. Nick knew the fence was lowballing him big time, assuming his age meant naivete. Fuck you, no way, man, Nick said. There's at least a couple grand there. The fence sat back and crossed his arms and studied the grim young man before him. He figured at first glance that he knew the type. Just another burnout hippie freak. He could guess at the backslide from the cornflakes smile childhood to the dehydrated walking stick standing in front of him. The increasingly desperate and depraved actions spiraling him down the drain of life, till he was hawking the family jewels and robbing people in Griffith Park by knife point for a fix, trying all the car door handles at night as he passed with his stupid little life. A punk. Sunken eyes, hollow cheekbones, tall and rangy. But upon closer inspection, the fence could see in the kid's arms that though he was skinny, he was all lean and coiled, wiry vascular muscle, and was just young enough to still be a problem. And there was something else. Something in the kid's eyes that set him on edge. It wasn't the typical listless burnout gaze that died midstream and fell to the ground, nor was it the intense amphetamine shine of the indigent, drugged-up schizo, though there was a bit of the former, with his slow-blinking heavy lids over pale blue eyes. No, it's that they seemed alien, separate, as if independent from his body, like the kid was being used as an observation window for some entity far away in a cold and vaporous dimension. Well, said the fence, the ring's personalized, so I gotta melt it down. So what? Said Nick. So what? So what you hopped up little punks never understand is, it's gotta sell, and I gotta go through the labor of selling it. And there needs to be a demand. There's no shortage of fucking jewelry in the world, so I gotta strip this for parts that are worth something, and that takes time and effort on my end. And then I gotta turn around and sell it cheap, otherwise why not get it any old place? This is the black market, kid. You got something people want that they don't make no more of, or there's no legal way to get it, antique guns, authentic World War II Nazi shit, then it's worth something, understand? Nick could only protest so much. Neither of them were familiar with each other yet, and he needed the money and didn't want to blow up the whole scene and lose out. He knew the fence could tell he was looking for quick cash, and he knew he was going to have to take a shit deal, but he couldn't give in too easy, and he wanted to let the guy know, at the very least, that he knew he was getting screwed, and that his street jive and yardbird lackeys didn't intimidate him one bit, so he pushed to drive up the price, knowing full well he didn't have a good hand to play or any leg to stand on. $850, said the fence finally, for all of it. Final offer, or you can take it right back to whatever poor auntie you stole it from. Consider it charity. Nick figured he could thumb an eyeball out of his fat head before his goons could even lay a hand on him. At least get a knuckle deep before he knew what hit him. You just gonna sit there and look stupid or what? Nick took the deal, then left and bought coke from a man in an alley off of Main Street, which he dissolved in water using a soda can he'd cut in half while he prepped his gear in the back of his van. He slapped the new Ted Nugent album in the tape deck and tied himself off at the edge of his bed, listening to Paralyzed blasting out from his aftermarket Pioneer speakers. I'm on a mission of mercy. I gotta testify. You lost your emotions. You're paralyzed. Tapping at the crook of his elbow until the vein was a bulging blue wire under the red lights, he stuck the needle in and drew back the plunger until he saw blood and then drove it home, the coke shooting straight into his bloodstream. After the initial rush, he fished some caps out of a plastic film canister, popped those in his mouth, chewed them up and washed that back with cheap bourbon he kept in a flask, then climbed into the driver's seat and drove away. He had timed it to come up on the shrooms right as the coke high would be tailing off. All keyed up and eyes blazing, he headed east on the 10, away from the city proper, away from downtown, the world outside his windshield and in his rear view, beginning to undulate with sparkling synchronicity. He switched tapes to Black Sabbath's Paranoid, his all-time favorite album, a belated birthday ceremony, and he went over the act again and again, reliving each detail, letting it roll around in his head, turning him on something fierce, and he thought about pulling off the freeway to jerk off again, but decided against it, and he began fixating on where it went wrong. The townhouse had shared a wall with other tenants, making him too nervous to use the gun. What if she didn't follow his orders and he had to shoot her? What if he screamed too loud? If he fired the gun, that would bring the neighbors, or rouse them out of their bed and maybe to their phones. Though full possession of her unconscious body had been incredible, it could have been better. Next time he'd do it right and not blow it. Not be so damn chicken shit. Next time would be different. Hail Satan. Nick knew by signing his work that the crimes could be more easily connected, and that meant the heat would turn up, more resources mobilized, more man-hours approved, task forces assembled. That sort of thing, especially if the press ran with it like he hoped they would. He needed to lay low for a couple weeks, see what would come out in the wash. He also knew he needed to clean up a bit, flush his system. He was too strung out, it was making him sloppy, and he was burning through way too much cash. He resented the fence for clocking it. It would only take a few days, and he had youth on his side and the dexterity of a natural-born athlete, and figured he could rely on this to rubber band with minimal withdrawal. He decided to go somewhere familiar, anodyne, boring, safe, a place he hadn't spent much time in for quite a while. Claremont, 30 miles east of downtown, the furthest you can get before you reach Orange County. While only a short distance on a map, it might as well have been another planet, for all its relation to Los Angeles proper. Some people might commute into LA for work, but it was entirely possible to live your whole life there and never have occasion to go further west than Pasadena. He reached Claremont before dawn and drove his van up a fire access road winding into the hills at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains, right above the rich neighborhoods, parking where he could see the entire city sprawl below. He knew these roads well after a summer community service stint working fire prevention after getting caught breaking into a neighbor's house when he was 14. The gate was locked, so he used bolt cutters on the chain, but kept the padlock closed and draped the chain back into place to stage the illusion of it still being locked, so anyone in Forest Service who drove by with a clipboard would find a closed gate and a locked padlock, unless they actually went up and physically inspected the damn thing. Nick bet correctly they'd just drive on by and mark it down by sight. Before dawn crept in, Nick laid on top of his van and smoked a joint to cut the dueling highs, watching Gestalt demons spread their wings in the cloud forms of the purple starry night above. When he finally sat up, he thought he saw nuclear reactors on the horizon, and when he crawled back in the van and laid in his bed and drifted off to sleep, he dreamt of dog-sized Allosauruses on the leashes of NVC handlers in the lysergic green jungles of Vietnam, standing in the slit bellies of screaming American GIs, gnashing at their guts amidst the citrus clouds, pouring out from the trees under a petrol blue sky. Chapter 3. Epigraph. Warm wind caress her lover it seems. Oh Annie, dreamboat Annie, little ship of dreams. Heart, dreamboat Annie. Leanne's diary, Sunday, June 10th. Hey, it's me. I'm finally back. Did you miss me? I haven't written in here in such a long time, but I need to get better at being consistent. I think it would be good for me. It's been over a year now since Kenny died, and I figure I should say something about it, but I am not even sure what. So here it goes. I know I miss him so much. It still hurts. Everyone says it will get better with time, which is something I think people say when they don't know what else to add. I guess that's because maybe it's true, but what good does that do me now? I listen to his records and it makes me feel close to him again. It's funny. I used to hate most of the music he liked. It freaked me out. I feel silly about it now, but it was just too heavy and dark and weird. But now I love it, especially Led Zeppelin. It's hopelessly cheesy, but I like to imagine Robert Plant singing me to sleep at night. That'd be so nice. I still think I like Robin Zander more, but something about Plant's voice just makes me... Well, I won't say it here. I'm worried about Dad. He's passed out drunk every night. He used to hide it from me, but now as soon as he's home from work, he just drinks himself stupid in front of the TV. The TV, of all things. Can you believe it? The same guy who called it the idiot box my whole life, and used to yell at me and Kenny for sitting too close to it, and not barely letting us watch it ever. And now look at him. And he's so moody. I never know who I'm going to be talking to, if he talks to me at all. Usually he keeps to himself, but sometimes I have to talk to him about something for school, and it's just dreadful. I feel so bad for him, though. He has to listen to people's problems all day at work, but I wish he had somebody to listen to him. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to say anything. I guess I understand, though. Maybe it's a phase. You don't think of dads as having phases, but why wouldn't they? Let's see, what else? Last time I wrote in here, I don't think Jill had started dating Gabe yet. Wow. Now she can't do anything without him. He follows her around like a sad puppy, too. I can't stand it. She used to be so independent. I hope I never get like that. They think I don't know what they're talking about when they whisper their gross little jokes to each other. It makes me want to puke. Oh well, at least school's out finally. What a long year. I really need to get my license so I'm not stuck bumming rides all summer long. I'm almost 17 and it's starting to get embarrassing that I can't drive. That's my number one goal. That and spending as much time at the beach as I can. Oh, and writing in here more. I wish I was good at saying things and using words the way I know some other people can, where they can say what they mean in a way that sounds so smart and interesting and worldly, but I just can't. Not yet anyway. It's time to get serious and focus while I'm still young. Okay, that's all I got for now. See you next time. Hopefully tomorrow, Leanne. Sheesh, don't be so lazy. Bye-bye. Leanne stepped from her second-story bedroom window out onto the sloping roof, then scaled down the latticework, footing a deck chair she'd left on the backyard patio to ease her descent. Then she traipsed across the grass to the fence and quietly out the back gate and into the alley where Jill's yellow BMW coupe was waiting for her, idling softly, radio low. Leanne hopped in the passenger side and Jill crept the coupe on out of the alley, cranking the dial on the new Frampton single, and then sped off into the night. Leanne hadn't been sure whether her father had made it to his room or if he was passed out in his chair or on the couch, nor had she heard him stumble into his office, but the TV in the living room had been turned off. It didn't matter. She was able to read the atmospheric fluctuations in the house like a blind man coming to an intersection or stepping out into a hallway, and knew precisely when her father was in a deep enough coma to slip out unnoticed. An unspoken curfew had been in place for her since she turned 14, as somewhere around 10 o'clock on non-school nights, with negotiation on the table, depending on the event. Not a bad deal, really. But ever since her brother's death, for some reason, the idea of haggling for freedoms in any way infuriated her. She didn't want to be observed or meddled with, and now that she was 16 and working, spending her own money, and her father mostly mentally absent, what parenting was there left to do? As long as she kept her grades up, what did it even matter? If she got into trouble, she'd face down the consequences. All the trouble she'd ever been in before she'd handled privately anyway. They cruised, windows up to save their hair from mussing in the wind. They'd been inseparable since first grade, after Leanne's mother had left and her father Ron moved Leanne and her brother from Santa Monica to Claremont, and her and Jill had been seated next to each other on the first day of school. Oh, the immeasurable impact assigned seating charts have had on the course of many a life. Sealing the deal was the fact that they were neighbors, less than a 10-minute walk door to door. It was fate. Jill and Leanne, Leanne and Jill, two little beach blonde California girls living on Bonnie Bray Avenue. And until Jill shot up in height, becoming the taller of the two in 7th grade, her hair getting straighter in the process, they had been practically doppelgangers and did everything in their power to reinforce it. Coordinated outfits, micro-idioms, private languages. Jill's father had passed away when they were in 4th grade, and it had been Leanne who helped her carry the burden, which she did, dutifully. And as apocalyptic an event as it seemed to Jill, the sun kept coming up every morning, and eventually Jill resumed something like normalcy again. And they were able to get back to the business of being young. Many a night they slept at each other's house, even on school nights, though Leanne preferred to stay at Jill's, not because there were less rules. On the contrary, there were more, and even stricter expectations on decorum and manners. No, it was because Leanne found Jill's mom, Pearl, so fascinating and so fun. And the older they got, the more fun she became to Leanne. Pearl would thanklessly make them sandwiches or brownies or Jell-O and drive them anywhere they wanted to go in her big brown DeVille. And she was always asking them questions, sharing beauty tips, dating anecdotes, and dropping the occasional brassy, innuendo-laden joke. She'd break out the tarot cards and read their astrological charts, share wacky stories of astral projection and New Age cosmology, and crystals and healing, and even sit them down for candlelit Ouija board seances on the long, cool, windy winter nights when she insisted the veils would be at their thinnest. All of this would drive Jill nuts. She was embarrassed of her mother's intrusions and escalating Key Party gurunalia. If there was all this secret power to the world, why didn't any of it help Jill's dad as he wilted away? But Leanne loved it and would go out of her way to indulge Pearl, much to Jill's chagrin. Leanne's own father, even before her brother Kenny's death, kept the girls at arm's length. Summer spent chasing waves, sunbathing in the yard, sleeping out on the trampoline at night, waking up at dawn, shivering cold, and running back in the house for warmth and food. Boys hadn't come between them, where they were united almost everywhere else, not so much in their taste of crushes, and they weren't all that competitive with one another in any meaningful way. They chased and were chased by boys and commiserated with one another through the ups and downs of it all. Then came Gabe. Gabe, with his wide hips and fat legs and narrow shoulders and ape-like long arms and pudgy banana hands. Gabe, with his too thick helmet of dark brown hair and girly features. Jill said he looked like Paul McCartney and would go on at length about his long lashes and dark eyes. And he did, Leanne agreed, indeed looked like Paul McCartney. But in Leanne's estimation, it was a soft, baby Huey contortion of Paul McCartney, a halfway aborted attempt to recreate him in a lab, or a talented 6-year-old's globular drawing of Paul McCartney. Galloping Gabe the Goober, with his mushy sibilance, forming words with his bottom lip. Leanne couldn't stand to look at him when he spoke sometimes. It'd drive her nervous. She couldn't fathom what Jill could possibly see in him, except the grotesque talk about what they jokingly referred to as his meat hook. Good, Leanne thought. God cursed him enough. It ought to work out that he'd at least have that going for him. She found him repellent, to say the least. Jill started dating Gabe right before Kenny's death, though they knew each other before then. When Kenny died, it wasn't that Jill didn't care. She liked and even loved Kenny. It's that Leanne felt Jill was only doing it out of obligation, out of pity, and scheduled pity at that. Sessions set aside and squeezed in between dates with Gabe and school and whatever else. Right when Leanne needed Jill the most, Gabe had ushered in an era of Leanne as third wheel, and the secret languages transferred, and the euphemisms for Jill and Gabe's sexual exploits multiplied. In actuality, the fractures in their friendship had started before Gabe had come along. Adolescence had been dividing them in small ways, getting larger by the day. As Leanne's curiosity had grown, as her inner analog world filled out and desired enrichment, Jill grew literal, and her expectations of life and what was to be found in it seemed so small and disappointing to Leanne. Jill always got the better grades and test scores, able to adhere to whatever standardization required of her, but it was apparent to Leanne that Jill didn't have anything all that interesting to say. No insights, no concepts. It was always up to Leanne to do all the abstract thinking, and up to her to ignite conversation, and drag them down any provocative thought tunnels. And Jill would engage and listen, and even feed into it as best as she could. But sometime after 8th grade, it became clear to Leanne that Jill found her musings to be somewhat exhausting, more something to put up with. For Jill it seemed music, television, movies, art, literature, these things were to be passively absorbed and put into a like or dislike column. No need to go any further. Leanne, on the other hand, was a daydreamer born and could get lost in art, an almost Stendhal syndrome, especially with albums, which felt to her like planets or caves, worlds unto themselves with their own flora and fauna, cascading through her mind's eye to catalog and obsess over, not just something to dance to or put on at a party, though Leanne loved to dance and party as much as the next gal. What Leanne didn't know is Jill felt insecure around her, judged, and she was. Even if Leanne kept a dissenting opinion or critical appraisal to herself, Jill could sense that it existed, hovering in the air between them, and its existence alone was enough to affect her as though it were said aloud anyway. Whatever resentment there was between them, though, it was smaller than the mutual genuine affection they'd built for one another through thick and thin, and the past they shared. And tonight was going to be fun. Gabe was meeting them at the party, which meant they had this car ride only to themselves, and, for the moment, Peter Frampton. Chapter 4. They had to park Jill's coupe at the bottom of the hill and around the block to find a space, and Leanne joked they were so far away they should have parked at her house and walked. Cars circled for parking of their own, and guys honked and cat-called at the girls as they joined the loose scrum of teenagers flowing uphill. By the time they reached the gates, Leanne was flush and glistening, and her new candies were killing her feet and biting into her skin. The party was at Dallas's place, a 2-story Mediterranean-style mansion embedded in several acres of imported jungle, tucked so far back from the street that you couldn't hear the rager going on until you were right up on it, some lucky trick of sound swallowing the noise up in the mountains. The band was set up behind the house in the gazebo by the pool, their music bouncing off the L-shaped backside of the building like an amphitheater. Dogs of Love, a local hard-driving power trio that Dallas had hired to play his kick-off the summer bash, consisting of the following members: Ryan Cooper, who everyone called Coop, the singer and bassist, all of 17, mousy long straight hair, chopped square bangs and a chintzy Mexi stash, narrow-shouldered, skinny with big knobby joints, shirtless in tight Levi's and white tennis shoes. He hadn't planned on being the singer. It just sort of happened that way. On drums was Chapin McClure, who everyone called Bud, 19 years old, human cement mixer, full chops and a mustache by the time he hit ninth grade, and a 5 o'clock shadow at 9 a.m. Stout with cabled forearms forged hauling and shaping granite countertops with his dad. Finally, wailing on his sunburst strat, nose and chin jutting out from a mighty afro of white blonde ringlets, was Levi Peters, 17, in a red shirt with a yellow shell logo and lacquered-on baby blue fringe hip huggers that he was wearing as a knowing lark. Guitar god, axe slinger, high priest of heavy rock, destined for greatness, and everyone who saw him play knew it. Legend was he holed himself up in his room for a whole summer, with nothing but a silver-tone guitar and PV amp from Sears and Robin Trower's Bridge of Sighs. Levi had announced himself to the whole school in mythic fashion, Leanne's freshman year, at a talent show assembly the first week of school. Those who didn't use the occasion to sneak off and play hooky were happy to attend, since it meant not having to go to class. He came on early. Being a freshman, he was low in the pecking order, following a couple comedy skits, a magic act, and one juggler. After a little trouble setting up and a couple ear-shattering pops, he proceeded to blow the ceiling off the place. He didn't just play well. He made the guitar howl and scream in tongues, no blockage from head to heart to hands. Pure expression, met with enough polish and showmanship. He played behind his back, over his head, and even with his teeth. He played in call-and-response games with the audience. He played recognizable riffs that transmogrified seamlessly into classical standards and then back. He whammy-barred and even had his own flashy finger-tapping maneuver, made recently famous by the much ballyhooed Eddie Van Halen, whom he saw open for Aerosmith at the fairgrounds before they were famous and blow them off the stage. Poor Perry and company looking old and tired, their set drowning in chants of Bring Back Van Halen. It broke Levi's heart, and needless to say, Aerosmith skipped any encore. Like Eddie Van Halen, Levi did it all with a smile, and his act was a party everyone was invited to, a joke everyone could get, told with a winning twinkle in his eye you could see from space. There were 2 more musical acts scheduled after his, and they both bowed out. From that moment on, he had the whole school eating out of his hands, an anointed king. He didn't carry himself with the usual moody temperament or mean streak of a typical teenage artist or musician. He was absolutely relaxed and at home in his own skin, laconic yet jovial, quick to flash a grin. He got along with everyone, even teachers adored him, in spite of his laissez-faire attitude toward attendance. Nobody's social status seemed to matter to him one bit, and he addressed everyone with the same demeanor, and if he liked you, he liked you. But he mostly kept counsel with the stoners and surfers, which is how he knew and was friends with Dallas, an avid surfer and all-around super jock. Over the years, Leanne had gone to school with and had known quite a few kids who were in commercials, or who had bit roles on television, or whose families were in entertainment in major and minor ways. They never really impressed her much. But Levi was the first person who, as far as she was concerned, you could just tell was meant to be famous. Not that he was guaranteed to be, but that whatever unknowable factor people were always on about, that was what it looked like. Those were the ingredients, an intangible quality, like an excess of gravity. He wasn't overtly or obviously handsome, but every photo of him ever taken, even the unflattering ones, he just popped. You couldn't take your eyes off the guy. Tall and broad, pale and freckled skin, face perpetually obscured within his curly mane, unless he tied it back behind his head or tucked it all behind his ears, revealing dark eyebrows and even darker eyes. Since that fateful day, that first week of school, the second week of September, Leanne, like most of the girls, nurtured a low-grade crush on Levi. Low-grade because his overwhelming popularity and near celebrity status at the school and in town meant she didn't even entertain the idea that he'd ever be interested. She had the occasional class with him, and she'd get caught in his tractor beam presence and fare as well as she could. But she saw him more as a natural resource, a wellspring of charisma and talent. Whomever he was rumored to be going out with, sleeping with, or seen with, it didn't matter to her. As far as she was concerned, he didn't belong to anyone. Dogs of Love finished out a cover of Driving Wheel, in which Levi translated the slide parts into string bends, and Dallas gathered the attention of the crowd to do a standing backflip from the top step of the gazebo. A buddy of his jumped in front of him and mockingly affected a Bruce Lee impression, and they play-fought until Dallas was bum-rushed into the pool by a cadre of his buddies. Leanne rolled her eyes when he got out and showily took his shirt off, to the wolf whistles and laughter of the crowd. Any excuse, she thought, but then he did a curious thing. He caught Leanne's eye and gave her a sly wink and a self-satisfied smirk, and maybe it was her buzz. but it worked on her. It made her a bit fuzzy feeling. Dallas was compact and muscular, squared-off sun and sandblasted features. Lips always looked chapped and the same color as his face, with wavy hair, gold at the ends, and charcoal at the root. He had a 442 he was proud of, which he insisted he'd bought with his own money because his dad refused to loan him a dime. But he got the money working weekends and summers at the battery plant his dad owned. But it was no insurmountable task for him to save up, since he wanted for nothing and knew college was paid for. But Dallas had discipline. He had it as an athlete, he had it as a student, and he had it with any and every goal he set his mind to. He was never late, he was never lazy. He worked amongst the Mexicans who all called him Potato Chip, due to the shortboard he tied to the top of his car. Dallas knew elbow grease was the only thing between him and victory at all ends, and his father's money was just a runway, but it wouldn't do the running for you. Dallas could see his future, and it was bright, and that's how he carried himself. Later on that night, Dallas would try and get Leanne up into his room, but she knew better, and instead he asked if she wanted to go for a ride, and to her own surprise she said yes, and they drove around and parked and made out in his car. He got handsy but was respectful of any protest. She didn't want to go all the way, and she didn't even know why, fully, she was making out with Dallas in the first place, and she'd wished he'd quit smiling so damn much in between kisses and necking bouts. He told her he'd long had a crush on her, and she was genuinely shocked. Leanne knew she was attractive to men, though she didn't quite understand it. She always felt her legs were too short, and that her breasts were too small compared to her hips, and that her face was too round. But she started getting serious attention at school and in public around 6th grade, when she went from what she considered boyish to developing, rather quickly that year, a woman's frame. She got curvy, while Jill got tall. Leanne thought Jill was very pretty, and was a little jealous of her height and long, thick, straight hair. To Leanne, Jill looked like a model or a princess, regal and poised, Cheryl Teagues of Monaco. Leanne had technically lost her virginity when she was 13, at a party, one of her first real parties, at Tyler Bushnell's house, when she had gotten far too drunk and awoke to a sharp pain in Tyler's older brother thrusting away in the bottom bunk of Tyler's bedroom. She had somewhat remembered crawling into his lap at one point and making out with him, but how she'd gotten into this dark room, she couldn't recall. She played up her semi-conscious state, closing her eyes and hoping to wait him out, and that it'd be over soon. But he took what felt like forever, until he finally pulled out and came all over the blankets and her, and then left. She never looked up at him, and had a vivid memory of the blankets balled up beside her, and the sheet she lay on done in a pattern to resemble a pizza slice, with olives and pepperonis on it, something a little kid would have. She didn't really count this experience, or the one where a friend of her mother's, who was watching her one afternoon, took her into the backyard for photographs, convincing her to undress, and then afterward, when she was ashamed and she started to cry, he gave her the film out of his camera and begged her not to say anything, and she didn't. During, and especially after these instances, and some others of lesser note, she knew good and full well they weren't how things were supposed to go, and had refused to let them take any sort of root, casting them somewhere in the dark parts of her mind, and if they did manage to flower behind the radiator and create hidden parasitic systems in her subconscious, it wasn't in ways that she'd be able to recognize. Outside of that, all her dalliances had been consensual, often breezy, and mostly pretty fun. And Dallas was harmless, and she was enjoying herself. He felt warm, and his muscular body was softer than she thought it'd be, and his hair far coarser than she would have assumed. She started laughing when Boston's "Let Me Take You Home Tonight" came on the radio, and she couldn't stop herself, and he asked if she wanted to go back to the party, and she said no, and he said he should probably get back to make sure the place didn't go to hell in a handbasket, and so he drove her home and dropped her off in the alley behind her house, and she snuck across the yard, and up the latticework, and crept back through her window, and changed into her nightgown, and fell asleep, right as the sun was coming up. Chapter 5. Nick woke up, clothes soaked through and body aching. Whenever he came down too hard, he was prone to a daisy chain of lucid nightmares. He couldn't make out how long he'd been asleep, but it was his own screaming that woke him up. That and the heat. It was scorching in the van. Even with all the windows down and the back wide open, it felt like an oven. His mouth tasted of ash and a sour foam that singed the dry cracks in the back of his throat. He reached for a jug of water, and even warm, it was manna from heaven. He chugged until there was a finger of liquid left, exhaling satisfied and wiping at his mouth and chin with the neck of his shirt. He thought about laying back down, but he had to take a piss something fierce, and he knew it'd be futile to ignore it, so he slid out the back and relieved himself in the dirt, one arm stabilizing against the side of the van as he looked out over the expanse and saw that there were 2 suns in the sky above Claremont. This second, secret sun had followed him for as long as he could remember, and its appearance was a sure sign of forthcoming mental turbulence, a warning that an episode was brewing. It was a hot purple that cast no light, except for the rare occasion when it shone at night and the land lit up like a blacklight poster, and when you looked right at it, you could see it at depth, like a tunnel. A churning voice from somewhere off in the hills called out and cursed his name, and reflexively Nick darted his eyes in its direction, but there was nothing there but bramble, and trees, and the drone of insects, and the twittering of birds, and he felt stupid for falling for the same old tricks his mind played on him. Then a concert of garbled, horrible shouting rose up behind him, and he closed his eyes tight and clenched his jaw, focusing hard to keep the stream of urine in the dirt in front of him, white-knuckling through what he knew were non-existent banshees. These spells were more rare these days, in comparison to when he was a child, and dark corners of his room would whisper lies and voices like something old and dead trying to sound young, and the shadows would shift and stretch and squawk, lurid gossip, and inky black monsters outside his bedroom window at night would dance across the yard, before disintegrating when he tried to look directly at them. Now whenever they'd come to him, he would bear down until they dissolved into a simmering ambience before fading completely, the whole time praying that it wasn't the harbinger of a permanent state, the opening salvo to a roaring, cheering chorus line that would never go away. He couldn't live like that. But it passed over him, and Nick shook himself off and zipped up his fly. When he climbed back in the van, he was hit with a rank, musky smell, like leather stew and Bradford pears, so he opened all the doors and lit some black cherry incense, wafting it around before letting it burn out on the countertop. He used the last bit of water to brush his teeth and rinse out his mouth. Though he was otherwise far from precious about his hygiene, he was quite finicky about his teeth. He hated the feeling of anything lingering on them, even if he hadn't eaten. Even breathing dry air throughout the day was enough to make him squirrely if he didn't find a way to clean them, and he'd fixate on the idea of dirt particles collecting on his enamel in a thin film and run his tongue over them incessantly until he caught himself doing it. After jerking off and a change of shirt, he found himself faint, so he started up the van and set a course for the day. Gas, something to eat, and the nearest laundromat. Chapter 6. The world went by outside her windshield, all golden brown to the pair of oversized, square-framed East St. Laurent sunglasses as the wind whipped her hair, and she traced the horizon with her fingertip and thought about nothing at all, until a blue VW came up on the on-ramp and merged into traffic in front of them. "Slugbug," Leanne yelled out before punching Jill on the meaty part of her shoulder. "Ow, you jerk," Jill said, laughing and slapping back at Leanne. "I already owe you one." "You're too slow. I'm driving, you witch. You left a huge welt on my arm last time. People are going to think Gabe beats me now." "Oh, please, darling," said Leanne, affecting her model of a glamorous old gossip out of a movie. "Everyone knows Gabe couldn't hurt a fly." Jill punched at Leanne's shoulder, and they went back and forth, slapping and shrieking until Jill caught her too high and knocked Leanne's sunglasses off her face, and Leanne gave her a brutal pinch on the arm, and Jill lost the wheel and swerved into the other lane and back, and then called for a truce, citing a need to pay attention to the road. They were heading north on the Orange Freeway, back from Huntington, having spent the day on the beach, leaving some time before 3 so they could beat heavy traffic. Leanne loved the beach. Some of her earliest conscious memories were formed there. Fragments, brushstrokes of an image, and a feeling, playing with a plastic baby elephant in the sand and being bit by a red ant she had let crawl on her finger, catching sand crabs with her mom, spotting their bubbles and racing to dig them up with her little plastic shovel before the next wave came in. "You better not have broke my glasses. They're too big for your face anyway. They make you look like a bug. A magical butterfly," Leanne said, placing them defiantly back on. "You didn't even pay for them." She hadn't. She'd stolen them from the Del Amo Fashion Center. She didn't even know why. She had the money. "Is your dad coming over to play cards tonight?" Jill asked. "Oh, I doubt it," Leanne said. "Maybe if your mom gives him a call and bugs him about it." "She's tried. Now she's asking me to ask you." "Yeah, I don't know what to tell you." Jill let the subject fizzle before looking too obvious about changing it. "So, heard from Dallas?" "I have been dreading the moment you'd bring that up. I can tell. Gosh, I don't know. I was buzzed. I don't know what you heard, but we only made out a little. You don't like him? I don't know. No. Leanne. What? It was just a fun thing to do at the time, but I don't want to date Dallas. I don't want to have some summer fling with Dallas. Why not? He's cute and rich. He's good looking, yeah. I can't explain it. I think he called the house a few times too, which, gee, I wonder where he could have got the number, Jill. What? Don't look at me. Yeah, right. I'm serious. You're so full of it. No, I mean it. I had nothing to do with it. Well, I don't know what to do. You can't avoid him all summer. You don't know that I can't. Jill gave Leanne a look, biting her bottom lip, which meant she was about to ask for a favor. She always pantomimed an exaggerated coquette shyness thing whenever she was about to do so, like spinning on one heel and kicking at the ground all bashful a la Bugs Bunny. So, Gabe and Flynn want to know if we could score some beer for tomorrow. My mom has been counting them since last time. I don't know what I can do about that. My dad doesn't even drink beer. It's hard liquor only. Can't those bonerheads ever score their own shit? He practically begged me, Leanne. No. Don't make me beg. I'm gonna need you to. Leanne. Leanne pretended to chew on it, even though she already knew what her answer was gonna be. What's the magic word? Please. Fine. What did you have in mind? Well, I think we could always do it the old-fashioned way. They went to the gas station across from Jigger's Liquor on Syracuse and Niagara, not too far from where they both lived, and parked on the side of the building away from the front windows that overlooked the pumps. They sized up potential marks to shoulder tap, a tried and true method for them, though it meant they had to flatter and patronize for male attention. If the men were too young, early to mid-20s, there was a higher likelihood they'd go along with it, but it could lead to being invited somewhere or solicited in some way. If they were older, it could be any variety of things, from innuendos redolent with plausible deniability to hardcore sweaty come-ons, or worse than that, a scolding and threats of law enforcement. What about him? Said Jill half-jokingly, pointing out a bespectacled old man in a short-sleeve button-up and tie. Too square, too old. I don't know. Old men can surprise you. A black van pulled up to the pump farthest from them, music blasting from inside before it parked and killed the engine. Leanne recognized the song, Alice Cooper, but not something you'd hear on the radio too much, from the Red album with the snake on the cover, whose name escaped her at the moment. The driver stepped out of the van and into the sun. He was tall, thick, greasy, dark shag matted down like a wet rat. He took the last drag of a cigarette and then flicked it to the ground and snuffed it with a twist of his heel, right at the foot of the pump. Leanne thought he looked achingly familiar, though she couldn't pinpoint where she knew him from. He cut quite the striking figure. Black Jack Daniels t-shirt, sleeves rolled to the delts, black jeans and black shoes. His limbs and torso were long and thin, shoulders broad and waist narrow. A pristine nose and severe, sharp, predatory cheekbones, giving the overall a not unattractive effect of a malnourished archangel, or a church statue of prefect set free into the world to wander, confused and hungry. Impalpable chimes of the future backfilled the present, echoing through tessellating fluid in all directions at all times. The great fractal changes form, takes the form it always had. What about him? Leanne asked, embarrassed by the way it came out, clocking Jill's immediate recoil. He looks like he just woke up. He looks like he needs a bath, Jill said before looking askance at Leanne, who'd gone quiet. And you'd probably give him one, wouldn't you? I might. Gross. He seems so familiar to me, like I know him from somewhere. Great, that means you can be the one to go ask him. No. Why not? He's your husband. No way, you're coming with me. This was your stupid idea in the first place. Nick was wiping his windshield and lost in his reflection in the glare. Squinting with the sun, he clenched his jaw, tightening his face into a scowl to highlight his bone structure. He knew reflective surfaces like a shark knows the banks of the shallow water, and would teeter between obsessive fixations on blemishes and perceived proportional irregularities, convinced he was some putrid insect exoskeletal formation with skin stretched thinly across it, and the other times when he'd recognize and be enthralled by his dynamic beauty, reliving the objectifying comments women and men had made to him in his lifetime, starting when he was a little boy, and classmates would tease him for being pretty like a girl, and the other times when he'd recognize and be enthralled by his dynamic beauty. When he finished, he spun around to return the squeegee to its bucket, and the girls were right upon him, as if they'd materialized out of thin air like fairy spirits of the gas station, in matching white shorts. Shit, Nick blurted out, jumping back. Hi, sorry, Leanne said, chuckling. My friend and I were just wondering, 'cause you look like you'd be cool. Yeah? Are you even 21? Jill asked. No. Oh, sorry, you look older. Never mind then, thank you. Sorry to bother you, Leanne added, as her and Jill began drifting away. Beer smokes, Nick asked. Well, both would be nice, said Jill. Yeah, we're looking to score some beer, though. You got any bread? Leanne nudged Jill, and she produced some folded bills she had ready in the pocket of her shorts and handed them to Nick, who asked what brand they wanted, and Jill said Coors. He then did a split-second bit of mental math before pocketing the cash and heading into the corner store. Oh, and Arctic Light Kings if they got any. Otherwise, Marlboros will do. The girl stood by the van and watched him through the window as he grabbed a 24-pack case of beer from the back fridge and then an ice cream sandwich from the cooler by the register, slapping it on the counter and pointing to the cigarettes he wanted. He moved through the transaction unfettered by nerves, and when he came back outside, he tossed the pack of cigarettes to Jill in plain view of everyone, and then tried handing them the beer. Don't do that out here, Jill said. Follow us, and Nick followed them to Jill's car, where he set the case of beer in her trunk. Do you live around here? Leanne asked as Jill closed the back and headed for the driver's side. You look so familiar. It depends, Nick said. Depends on what? Nick pointed back at his van. Depends on where I'm parked. You live in your van? Yeah. Oh, cool. Come on, Leanne, we gotta go, Jill shouted impatiently from the driver's seat before closing her door. Thank you so much, she added to Nick. Well, thank you, Leanne said. Yeah, Nick said. No problem. Yeah, maybe I'll see you around then. Leanne opened the door to the coupe and stopped. Wait, what's your name? Nick. Leanne, nice to meet you. Thanks again. You're welcome. Before Jill could pull away, Leanne stuck her head out the window and yelled for Nick and asked if she knew him from somewhere. He answered probably not, and she waved goodbye one last time as Jill drove off, not wanting to entertain any further conversation between these two. Nick watched the car shrink away as he unwrapped his ice cream sandwich and took a bite. Jill dropped Leanne off at her house, and she spent the rest of the afternoon daylight laying in her brother's bed and watching dust motes dance in the sunbeam yellowed through the diaphanous curtains, drifting downstream, floating face up on the top of her thoughts, her body tired and wobbly from sun and surf. Kenny's room had been mostly untouched since he'd moved out, the year prior to his death, taking with him not much more than what he had on his back. Most of the time, Leanne would select records from his vast collection and take them back into her room, returning them to their place on his shelf when she was done, where they were arranged in alphabetical order by artist. She was making her way through his whole collection, all the ones she hadn't heard yet, in between whatever album of her own she'd be hung up on or have a hankering for. Sometimes, though, she'd prefer to lay in his bed and use his record player, and found that it was easier for her to nap in his room. She'd put on Pink Floyd's Metal, its atmospheric closing track nourishing an oniric state. She imagined herself as a fairy queen of a high medieval fantasy, a pearlescent crown set with jeweled flowers sitting upon a throne of moss and lime-covered, carved blue stone and coral formations under the frame of a crumbled archway, the remains of some fallen, undersea kingdom long dried up and reclaimed by dense forest. Her throne at the mouth of a bubbling stream that flowed forward and moated around her and into a meadowed clearing surrounded by skyscraper evergreens. She summoned butterfly legions from the trees, and bouncing squirrels with bushy tails bounded over grass and glittery pine cone. Friendly tree frogs with eyes like black marbles climbed the stone, and great horned elk grazed and snorted, candy-colored finches and red-breasted robins hitching rides on their antlers. All the wildlife of the court ambulating in supplication to her benevolent majesty as the butterflies encircled her, becoming a great tornado reaching into the crystal blue sky above. This was something she'd been building since she was a little girl, as a game to help her sleep or whittle away the hours whenever bored in class or on a long road trip. She'd close her eyes and picture this fantasy tableau surrounded by her loyal fairy tale subjects. It started out so small and vague, but each time she'd return, she'd add a new detail, first calling the whole tapestry to mind as best as she could, then recounting as many specific elements, one after another, oldest to newest, and if she reached the end, she'd try and place something new there, and if she hadn't fallen asleep by that point, she'd live in it and explore, inviting any new intrigue that tickled her fancy. A handsome prince, an invading army of evil snail dragons, winged unicorns. She was particularly interested in seeing if she could build up enough mental momentum to carry the scenario into sleep itself and induce a narrative dream where she remained sovereign, but it would often fail, and the breaking point upon entry into dreamland erased from memory. She looked up into the eye of the butterfly storm as the sky darkened, and something sharp scraped across her foot, and she looked down and saw a black scorpion crawling up her leg. She tried to shake it off, but her movements were slow and her aim sloppy. She was struck with paralysis. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. Butterflies came to her aid, swarming about her body and lifting her skyward and away from the gathering scorpions and beetles and earwigs and silverfish that swallowed up the forest floor, rising in dung-heap spires to catch her. There was a peal of thunder, and storm clouds gathered, and from them came the dragonflies who descended upon her and her butterflies, chewing and tearing at their wings as they cried out in pain with voices like seagulls as they were devoured and they could no longer hold her, and she fell from the sky, coming down fast as if she was being sucked into the sea of shiny black shells and chattering steely mandibles below. She woke up right before impact, sweet relief outweighing frazzled nerves. She shut off the record player and went into her room and documented the nightmare in her journal, notable as it was, then showered and dressed and made her way downstairs to fix herself something to eat. Her father, Ron, home and seated in his brown easy chair, busied himself with the paper and a glass of scotch as Leanne built herself a bologna sandwich in the kitchen. "You going over to play cards at Pearl's tonight, Dad?" Leanne asked from the kitchen. Ron didn't answer, and she called out for him, and he yelled back that if she needed his attention, to not beckon to him from the other room like a dog, so she stepped into the living room and asked him again. "Not tonight," Ron said, eyes not leaving his paper. "Why not?" "'Cause that woman drives me nuts, that's why." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she's nuttier than a fruitcake, Leanne." "Oh, okay." Leanne studied her father, a large man with a large head and dry helmet of now sandy brown hair and graying strawberry beard. She thought he looked like a spit-groomed old lion. She remembered when she was little and he'd wear his green lace-up chemise, and she thought he looked like Robin Hood with his shiny blonde hair and a continental part and neatly kept Van Dyke goatee, smoking his pipe and listening to jazz. And he and his friends and her mother would sit in circles in their living room in Santa Monica, and he would bring her in front of the group and grill her about what she had learned that day and invite her and her brother to listen to the adult conversations, while their mother sat cross-legged on the floor rolling joints, though Leanne didn't know that's what they were at the time. Back then he spoke to her warmly and firmly and almost like an adult. Now he was distracted and distant. Catching his attention could unleash a coiled spring of anger. Ron waited until she sat down with her sandwich, and without shifting his concentration, he said, "You think I don't know what you're up to at night?" Leanne's blood went cold and seemed to drain to her feet, yet her face got warm and flush. "What?" Leanne asked. "Don't play dumb with me." "Dad, do whatever you want, Leanne," Ron said before shuffling a section out of his paper. "You're old enough to make your own decisions. I tried with your mother. I tried with Kenny. I'm through trying. Nothing more I can teach you." Leanne ditched her sandwich in the garbage under the sink and stormed out the front door. Ron shook his head and turned the page, mumbling a grievance to himself. They were supposed to meet at Flynn's house for a barbecue, but that went belly up for reasons Leanne was never able to decipher, and instead she found herself in the den at Jill's house with Gabe and Jill. She was bored, hungry, and feeling rather pissy about everything. She'd lost her appetite walking over to Jill's and fretting over the implications of her father's revelation, that he knew she was sneaking out at night, and that, somehow even worse, he didn't even care, that it was blood destiny shared with her mom and brother that he was powerless to stop. But now, sitting on the couch, bathed in the blue light of television, her stomach groaned as she feigned interest in Chico and the man, as the walls vibrated with the sound of adults engaged in middle-aged horseplay from the dining room. Laughter and the clink of ice against crystal. She lamented not having a car of her own, not having a license, not being able to drive herself somewhere else, anywhere she wanted. She sat there stewing, slumped forward, elbows on her knees and chin in her palms, and she wondered why she didn't walk back home right this instant. Why not? Why did she stay? Because she wanted to show her dismay to Jill, to perform it bodily, to find the occasion with which to imply her disgust at their pedestrianism. "Let's put on some music," Leanne said finally. "Why?" Jill asked. "Why not? Happy Days is coming on." "It's a repeat," Gabe said. So, Jill said angrily. Ugh, Leanne added under her breath. I hate watching TV. There it was. That was a dagger she wanted to throw. Then go. Leanne stood up in an indignant huff and bolted out the den. Jill called after her, rising to follow, but Gabe pulled her back down into him, and she didn't put up too much of a fight. Leanne decided not to broadcast her anger by the throng of adults she'd have to cross in the living room, seated around the table playing poker under a cloud of blue smoke, so she relaxed her posture as she passed. But Pearl could sense something was amiss when she saw Leanne go bobbing by. Leanne, honey, Pearl said, where are you going? Oh, I'm just tired, Leanne said. Too much sun today. Well, okay, say hi to your father for me. Tell him we miss him. No, we don't, a man interjected, who Leanne didn't know, with whom Pearl batted at playfully. I will, Leanne said. And come see me tomorrow. Let me do a reading for you. Okay, bye, Miss Carter. Bye-bye, hon, Pearl said through the cigarette she was lighting, giving her guests a deadpan look and a shrug as if to say, teenage girls, am I right? After Leanne had shut the door behind her. Leanne walked home in the dark, and there was a breeze that she wished would go away, making her chilly even though it wasn't all that cold out. Too much sun and no food was catching up to her is all, she thought. The wind picked up slightly, as she lowered her head and gripped herself tight as if walking against a perilous gale. Chapter 7. Epigraph. Just like a jewel shines in the night, she burned so hot out under the streetlight. UFO, only you can rock me. Nick prowled a quiet Claremont in his van, feeling pretty good, no destination in mind, just killing time until it got late enough to hit downtown LA. He'd been cruising around all day long, crisscrossing the grid, jogging whatever memory came loose. Claremont was TV California. Brady Bunch houses you expected singing families to live in. Backyard pools, squared off green grass lawns. Kids playing in the streets lined with eucalyptus and American elms. A palm tree skyline, smell of orange blossoms. Always a sunny day. Nick's father, Paul DeMarcus, had brought the family to Claremont from El Paso when Nick was 11 to live with his aunt and uncle on his mother's side. Soon after that, his Uncle Pete came to live with them after he got back from Vietnam, staying in the garage before his mother made his father kick him out for being a bad influence on the kids and for carrying on an affair with her sister and threatening her husband when he confronted them. It was a bad scene and a constant crossfire of cultural conflict. Nick's father was Lithuanian, first-generation American, born in Cicero, Illinois, the oldest of 7, taking on a job as a window cleaner as a teen to help support the family before joining the army during the war effort, where he picked up injuries that would plague him the rest of his life and quicken his relationship to the bottle. After the war, he puttered around taking odd jobs until he found his way down to the Lithuanian enclave in Tucson, and from there El Paso, where he met Nick's mother Maria at a bus stop when she was 14. She was a soft and pretty young Mexican girl, and he was gruff, mean, and handsome. She spoke little English, and he himself carried a thick accent. But they were both Catholic, and soon they were married, and she was pregnant. Growing up, Nick's father allowed no Spanish in the house, wanting his children to be raised entirely in the American fashion. As a result, Nick never became fluent in Spanish, though he knew a kitchen version and understood it when it was spoken. Nick remembered his headlights red as the sun slipped away when he caught himself straining to see. He loved the night, and he liked watching the houses as he drove past or wandered on foot, the porch lights like fireflies, the flickering blue aquarium glow of a television from a bay or bedroom window, diorama scenes of people in their living rooms or standing at their kitchen windows doing dishes. How vulnerable everybody was, how they didn't know it, feeling safe in their terrariums. People in neighborhoods like this took notice of loud or suspicious noises in the dead of night, of faces they didn't recognize, and of unfamiliar vehicles trolling their streets. Anything outside of routine was likely to be logged by somebody. The coast was never clear. No, it would be dumb to try anything here. Still, some mild reconnaissance wouldn't hurt none, just in case. He planned on driving into LA and getting an 8-ball and shooting it up. He wasn't fiending at all, which was part of the reason he felt he could manage. No need to deprive himself of earthly pleasure, right? No need to go cold turkey. He wasn't on anyone else's watch. Why not just taper down a little? keep it under control, and if he found himself holed up in some roach motel shooting up for days on end, then so be it, man. Fuck it. Who cares? Who cares about any of this? Who gives a flying rat's ass? No, he was accountable to the great work. He'd committed, and there was no turning back. He had plans, and he had to stick to them, and he couldn't afford to be sloppy. He could make a clean break of it. He would make a clean break. After tonight. He'd thrown on KMET earlier and caught the Cynthia Fox show, making a mental checklist of the new tunes to pick up. He didn't think to change the station afterward and let it roll ahead with the rock and roll lottery. A change of pace for Nick, who usually preferred to curate what he was listening to when he could. He wasn't paying much attention, mind wandering and lighting the next cigarette in the chain when it came on the radio. That unmistakable Middle Eastern lick, followed by a driving, high tom and snare combo. Painted Black, his favorite song. Nick knew better than most that something could be known and beloved by millions and still feel like a secret. He wasn't a massive fan of the Rolling Stones. He liked them well enough, enjoyed most of the hits, a few of which could bring a tidal wave of nostalgia. Memories of his eldest sister dancing in her room and the feel of the carpet he sat on while she played her records and he drummed on the floor and whatever else was in reach. But the Stones weren't heavy enough, weren't mean enough, and they weren't evil enough, in the comic book sense of the word anyway. Their lyrics and the contents and worlds of their songs carried with them too many matters of the profane and banal adult reality, matters of the heart and experience and the pathology of being a Rolling Stone, of being in the band, the Rolling Stones. They weren't as hard-driving and fist-fight ass-kicking authentic as AC/DC. Didn't get his blood pumping in that way, nor did they inspire the internal, atmospheric worldscapes and visceral, powerful, mystical imagery that his Precious Sabbath or acid rock like Hendrix did. But Painted Black was something else. It always stopped him in his tracks, like the Who's Behind Blue Eyes, another stultifying song from a band that Nick could take or leave. How could Jagger know? How could he so fully embody it? This thing inside him, the thing Nick felt he was. It rang true with the melancholy, the anger, the bombastic, tragic, romantic solipsism. It was Byronic, demonic. Nick could feel the power and isolation and loneliness all wrapped up in a raga bolero gallop. Chill shot down his neck and back, down through his arms and across his scalp. It moved him like no other piece of music could. He'd had the song on a greatest hits collection, Hot Rocks, Tape 1, Side B, right after Mother's Little Helper, a song he hated, but getting it like this, unbidden, after the perfect amount of time since he'd last heard and obsessed over it. There was nothing better, and he slipped into his thoughts all charged up and animated with the song, and he saw himself in his own movie, of which he was the doomed romantic lead, coasting to the stop sign at the end of the block, and about to roll right on through, when she crossed his headlights. Leanne squinted at the black van, near certain that it was him. She didn't want to embarrass herself, but as soon as it was clear she'd guessed correctly, she approached the driver's side window as he lowered his music. "Hey," Leanne said, "it's you." "Hey," Nick said. "What are you up to?" Nick shrugged. "Nothing, just, I don't know, driving around listening to music." "You like to drive around alone at night?" "Yeah, sometimes." It seemed like fate, meeting him here. Her mind had more than once glanced in his direction throughout the day, trying to suss out where it was she'd known him from. Sure that she did, and sure, too, that she'd see him again, and that he cut quite a compelling and mysterious figure, tall and strange and severe. Eyes so pale blue the black of his pupils jumped out at you in stereoscopic 3D. Leanne had an idea and a sudden surge of devil-may-care confidence, and decided to take her shot. "You hungry at all?" she asked. Nick drove them to Bob's Big Boy. They talked little, and it was a short trip, but she managed to steal a look into the back of his van when she was sure he wouldn't notice, and was horrified. Interminable stacks, milk crates overflowing with junk, clothes in piles, cans and bottles and tipped-over black trash bags, sink piled with stained paper plates and fast food styrofoam containers. Only the bed had any clearing, with blankets and clothes all pushed to one side against the wall. It was hot as a jungle, and it smelled of crusty socks and old car fresheners, and a sour teenager potpourri of God knows what else. It was nothing like what she had pictured when he told her he lived in his van. She'd imagined something between the Partridge Family bus and a Bedouin's tent, Or a romantic spare and stoic poet's hideaway. Nothing but a bedroll and a stack of books and reams of paper. There were books, all right, wedged and towered every which way. They sat outside, and Nick was near finished with his burger, and he'd barely spoken a word. He didn't seem to need to make any small talk at all, leaving it up to Leanne, who typically wasn't shy, but couldn't bring herself to think of anything to say, afraid of looking silly, shallow, or uncool. She waved through the glass at some kids she recognized from school, Debbie and Janine. "You know them?" Nick asked. "Yeah," Leanne said. "We're not best friends or nothing like that, but I've had classes with them since, sheesh, I can remember." Nick lit a cigarette. "Thanks again for helping us out." "Don't mention it. You know, I can't believe you're not 21. You look so much older, not in a bad way, though." "Yeah, I've always looked old for my age. They never card me. Been this tall since 8th grade. How tall are you?" 6'3", I guess. "Wow, something like that anyway. It's not just your height, though. It's your eyes." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Actually, I think you have real pretty eyes. It's just they're so, I don't know, serious." Leanne hid her embarrassment in her next bite of food, hoping he'd volunteer some new bit of information or tract of conversation. Ask any question, anything. But he didn't, and he looked like he was ready to get going. "I saw you had a lot of Black Sabbath tapes." "Yeah, they're pretty much my favorite band." "Yeah, my brothers too. I really like them a lot. Their songs have a good groove, and the singer's got a really unique voice. Like a crazy person yelling at you. But it's pretty too, and I really like their slower songs. You know, the really dreamy ones. Like the one on their second album. I can't remember the names, though. Planet Caravan?" "Yes, that one. It's like you're on a river in a space. Is that dumb?" "No. Solitude's a good one, too. On Master of Reality. My best friend Jill hates them. She says they give her bad vibes because they're wicked and satanic. They're not satanic at all." "That's what I said." Nick wished that they were, but there was too much of a moral framework in their songs for him to endorse the idea that they were truly pro-Satan. They just embrace the evil that exists in this world. I mean, the lyrics and the imagery are all fucked up maybe, but they all express a pretty Christian worldview. Good versus evil, where evil is sort of on top. Are you a Christian?" "No. You?" "I don't think so, no. Not really. I don't think about it too much, to be honest. You could drive yourself crazy with something like that. I do pray, though, whatever that's worth." "Yeah, Zeppelin are the ones on the heavy-duty occult trip, especially Jimmy Page." "Really?" "Yeah, their stuff's full of black magic symbols, invocations, hidden messages, shit like that. Page is big on Aleister Crowley, you know." "Who?" "You don't know who Aleister Crowley is?" "No. He was like this famous occultist who formed his own religious order, did all these ornate rituals, some of them even public." "Why?" "To, alter reality and bind it to his will, commune with spirits, invoke entities. Really freaky guy, and all sorts of trippy shit. Had the whole world talking about him." "That's silly." "What's so silly about it?" "I don't know. Alter reality? Like a wizard or something? Give me a break, right?" "I don't know. Who's to say what reality even is, or what it's made of, or how much of it we can really even see at all, or how much of it we even share. Symbols have power. They reach forward through time and influence people. Who knows what else they can do? You believe in that kind of stuff?" "No," Nick lied. "But it seems to be working out for Jimmy Page. I don't know if he's altering reality, but I guess so. My friends never talk like this, and they get mad at me when I do." "Talk like what?" "Like the meaning of lyrics and songs or album covers or anything like that. They just tell me to quit analyzing everything, Leanne. It's just a song." "Yeah, most people are bullshit. Get better friends." "Yeah, I probably should. Eventually you gotta learn to regulate yourself when talking to normal people." "I don't know. I think I'm pretty normal." "Well, maybe you are then." Leanne returned to her food. Nick took a swig from a flask he kept in the jacket pocket of his army coat. "What do you do for work?" Leanne asked. Nick's brain stalled. What could he tell her? Odd jobs here and there. Construction site cleanup, moving furniture, any day labor I can get. Anything that'll float me until I, feel like moving on. "You find anything around here?" "No, actually. Just taking it easy for a bit." That doesn't sound so bad. Going anywhere you want, anytime you want to. Nick shrugged. But if I could go anywhere I wanted to go, I certainly wouldn't pick Claremont, that's for sure. It's so boring. It's not so bad. I grew up around here. Figured I'd come see how it's doing. Been a little while. You lived here? Yeah. We moved from El Paso when I was little. Nick gestured to Leanne with the flask. What's in it? Bourbon. Leanne took the flask. She didn't know why. She didn't like bourbon at all. She looked around to see if anyone noticed or cared, then took a swig, swallowing it down and coughing and handing the flask back to Nick. Oof, thank you. You must drink a lot, huh? Yeah. Why? I don't know. Keeps the place interesting. Nick could see her struggling with the bourbon. She kept clearing her throat. It struck him that she might be younger than he thought. How old are you? 17, she lied, surprising herself at how fast that came out, feeling her belly go all warm from the alcohol. So that makes you what? A junior? Yeah, I will be next year. This coming year, I mean. What school do you go to? Montclair High. That's where I went. What year did you graduate? I didn't. Dropped out after freshman year. Gosh, you remind me so much of my brother. He dropped out too. Can't blame him. Waste of time. I don't know. I don't think it's that bad. I wouldn't have even gone at all if it wasn't for football. But they found out I got seizures and kicked me off the team, so I said fuck it and bailed. Oh, which was like bullshit, you know. They weren't even that bad. It wasn't like swallow my tongue shit or anything, just sometimes I'd get like a tunnel vision out of nowhere and my body would lock up and I wouldn't be able to move for a couple minutes. Sheesh, that sure scared me. Oh boy. It wasn't that big a deal. They were worse when I was little. Do you still get them? No. Well, that's good. A light bulb went off in Leanne's head. Wait. What? Oh, never mind. Nothing. I thought maybe you might have known my brother, but I think he'd have still been in middle school by the time you'd left. What's his name? Kenneth Mathers. Kenny. Doesn't ring a bell, but I'm not great with names. If I saw his face, I'd know. You still live around here? No, he's not with us anymore. Oh, sorry. It's all right. How'd he go? He was shot. He was shot? Yeah. In Claremont? No. It was in Downey, where he was staying with some girl. His girlfriend, I guess. It was over some drugs or something. A friend owed some guy a bunch of money, and they came to kill him, and my brother just happened to be there. But I think it was also because the guy liked the girl. It's all pretty messed up. They catch the guy who did it? Yeah, they did. Leanne choked back a sudden wave of emotion she wasn't expecting, having to wipe away a tear that formed without her permission. Even with the food, the bourbon had her buzzing more than she expected it would. Sorry, it's just, he was my favorite person in the whole world. You got any siblings? Yeah, 2 brothers and a sister. All older than me, but I'm not so close with any of them. Oh, you live with your folks? Just my dad. Where's your mom at? She left when I was little to go live up on some hippie farm in Oregon. Only seen her one time after that, when she showed up on my 13th birthday and tried to convince me and Kenny to go live with her. And I was like, heck no, no way. We hated her, especially Kenny. She didn't even show up for his funeral. Can you believe it? Yeah, family's a real drag. You could say that again. You get high? Sometimes, usually before I eat though. They shared a joint in the front seat of his van, cracking up after a radio spot for a televised taping of a Tom Jones concert at Knott's Berry Farm on the 15th, and she'd explained that when she was little, she thought Tom Jones was in the Doors because she couldn't tell his and Morrison's voices apart, or Robert Plant's from Janis Joplin. Not when she was little, even though the Doors played the first concert she ever went to, at the Bee Inn in Griffith Park when she was 4 years old. She couldn't see or remember the stage from where she was, but she remembered out of focus color forms, and the flowers in her hair, and the taste of tangerines, and the smell of grass everywhere, and her father telling her that it was fertilizer when she asked about it. To this day, she couldn't help but picture a news anchor or a game show host style crooner whenever she heard the Doors. And as she went on, Nick caught himself laughing at something she said, and upon realizing he was so visibly enjoying himself, he became self-conscious, awkward. He didn't know why, while she grew more strident, her mind all fizzy and loose. You know, Leanne said, exhaling smoke, you really ought to clean this place up a bit. I'm not trying to impress anyone, Nick said. Leanne didn't pick up on the defensive tone in his voice, and continued, And it smells all musty and gross in here. She looked at Nick, his eyes cast downward, and she could tell he was embarrassed, possibly even angry. Sorry, that was rude. Nick said nothing, letting cold silence set in until it became unnerving. Leanne was suddenly aware that there was nobody parked anywhere near them. So I should probably be getting home. Nick started the van. Leanne had instructed him to park at the end of the block and not in front of the house, just in case. The mood had lightened up again on the drive home, and she felt bad for hurting his feelings, and thinking maybe she'd never see him again, she decided she should do something about it. Make it obvious. Thanks for taking me to get food and hanging out with me, she said as Nick shifted into neutral. Yeah, Nick said. I'm actually staying pretty close to here myself. Really? Yeah, there's a fire road right up the street that leads to a little spot in the hills where nobody bothers me. Oh, I think I know it. We party up there sometimes. Yeah, well, maybe I'll see you around then. Leanne let her eyes go warm and come hither, and waited with her hand on the door handle until he looked over and met her gaze. And in the most pleasing, cat-like and come-hither way she could muster, she said, I'd really like that, Nick. Nick blushed, and she opened her door. Good night. Yeah, you too. She slid out and shut her door and crossed the street. Nick watched her all the way up to her front porch before he put the van in gear and drove away.